Dave, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
What's a little bit about myself? What are you curious about?
Anything background, what you're interested in? Do you like bathtubs? Anything?
Do I like bathtubs? I like showers better than bathtubs. I'm a coder. I like programming. I like math.
Loud bangs.
I like cats. That was probably a cat. Could have been a dog. I don't know. Let's see what else. I'm the webmaster for voluntarist.com because I don't think people should be forced to do things.
Cool. All right. So the topic today was, can atheism and materialism be justified? Can you tell me more about your position on that?
So I guess those are two belief systems. Any belief system can be justified. It's really a question of how honest are you being with yourself. So everybody has to answer that question for themselves.
I've been typically it's looking from an objective perspective. Does the evidence indicate one position over the other, objectively, independent of your subjective opinions? That's mostly what I'm looking for, what I'm interested in.
Well, I guess I'd have to take each one separately. So atheism is based on the concept of God, which everybody holds that a little differently. I guess some people just defer to their church or their religion or their guru or somebody else. Lots of people defer to somebody else. So they believe in whatever that person means by God. And so they're not atheists. And is that justified? No, I don't think it is. You have to come to terms with what you mean by a higher power. Whatever it is that you would be believing in, if you were not an atheist, you'd have to have a good idea what that is. And like I said, most people just defer to some religion. So I don't think the opposite of atheism can be justified. Atheism can be justified.
All right. And materialism?
What is materialism to you?
The view that the fundamental nature of reality is matter and energy kind of stuff, no consciousness, no extra ontology.
Okay. I would say that's not justified, because it is true that I'm just assuming that you have experience. You're having an experience right now. And we make that assumption about lots of things, animals, people, which means there's more to it than the material, which I think breaks one of those things that you just said. So
what about experience would not be explainable from a materialist perspective?
For me, it's just not explainable. I mean, I've heard it's a thing that happens to you because you are very complex. Like, oh, you have so many neurons inside your brain and they're all working together to create this illusion. Well, it's an illusion for a thing. What is the thing that it's an illusion for? Itself? I mean, yeah, then that's like we made a machine and it seems to have experience. So experience must be fake. But I'm having the experience.
Well, I think experience is real. I think it's just an emergent property of brains. I don't think it's a new thing.
Right. You don't think that there's a thing other than your brain that's having the experience that you're having. You just attribute that subjectivity to your brain. Like your brain is capable of having a subjective experience.
Yeah.
I totally understand that. It just didn't feel that way to me. It doesn't work for me. If
do you
we
mean?
could build something that would express that it's having a subjective experience, that would make more sense. But everything we build that does that, it's because we programmed it to do it.
But why would it be more reasonable to say that materialism is wrong in that instance? Because obviously we haven't solved consciousness in any way. But if you want to say that materialism can't be justified, would seem to imply that there's some other ism that we should believe in some case. Um, and I don't think that's reasonable. I think materialism has a strong inductive case, so it's justified from my perspective. And I think that any alternative of what consciousness could or what could explain consciousness would be unjustified. It would just be hypothesizing.
Okay.
Would you disagree?
Well, sure. But in my head, there's value in you having a perspective and me having a perspective. And that is the case. And those two perspectives are different. And there's value in the difference between the two perspectives because you're you and I'm me. And comparing the two perspectives to see how they differ opens the door to a lot of advancement, I guess you could say, in philosophy, in relating to other people, in having a good life, et cetera, et cetera.
Would any of those things relate to it being like justified in believing it simply because it would produce good conversation? Like there are lots of
Yeah, sure. I mean, you could look at it that way. Is there? So there's it seems like there's you have an attraction for reductionism. So if something can't be justified, then you would say, well, there's no use in that thing because it can't be justified. But it might be, and it might also be unjustifiable. We might not have the mental capacity or the knowledge or the evidence. We might not have anything that can validate a particular view, but that view might end up being really useful. It might actually be a correct view. It's just not provable. So the unprovable things which are true would be off limits to, well, you, I think in this case, when I say you seem to be attracted to reductionism, if something's not provable, then it's not available to you and you can't benefit from it. That sucks. I wouldn't want to be in that position.
Well, it seems like if the opposite is the case, you can make up anything you want, and the infinite number of false things, which may be untrue and useful, would be accepted from your position. That seems very counterintuitive.
Yeah, you're right, which is why we do science. And then science tells us, oh, you have a story about this and it's wrong. And you can prove to yourself that it's wrong because you do the scientific experiment and come up with an outcome that shows your story is wrong. So then you throw that story away. And that is basically what we do with science is we make shit up and then we test it and we show that it's wrong and then we reject it. And we've done that over and over and over again. And we have a whole bunch of stuff that we've thrown away. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that we haven't thrown away because we can't prove it's wrong. But when you think, well, how do you prove something's right? You can prove stuff is right in math because we made math up. We made up all the numbers and the ways we put numbers together. So we can you can do math with a piece of paper and a pencil. You don't need to go out in the world and do things. But if you're going to do science, then you have to go out in the world and do things and prove yourself wrong or fail to prove yourself wrong and help your hypothesis become a theory.
Yeah, but just having a hypothesis in and of itself probably isn't justified. Just my hypothesis is X. And because we have a good track record with material stuff and making predictions and confirming stuff, seems rational to think that consciousness is just going to be another one of those things on the list of like, for trying to answer the question, what stage is consciousness at in the hierarchy of stuff in the universe? You've got like quantum fields, physics, chemistry, biology, brains, and then is consciousness before the quantum field stuff, or is it after the brain stuff? And it seems like, based on all the evidence we have, it's rational to conclude it's after the brain stuff and not before the quantum field stuff. It seems like there's quite a diversity between consciousness and physics in that way.
Okay. It seems that way. It seems to you that it comes at the end of the progression from, what did you start with?
Quantum fields, physics,
Quantum fields.
chemistry,
Okay.
biology, brains, consciousness.
Okay, so adding complexity. Quantum fields, is that the simplest thing in the universe? Is that why you started there?
Probably.
Okay, so on the spectrum from simple to complex, to you, it seems like consciousness would be at the end. Like it's super complex. And to me, the opposite seems to be the opposite. Consciousness just is. You just are. I mean, I just am. And so it's the simplest thing. There's no fundamental pieces of it that fit together to make it so. It just happens to be. I think there's a guy named Hermes Trismegistus. Have you heard of that name? He was a Greek philosopher. I believe the Greeks named the messenger god after Hermes Trismegistus. And he came up with the 7 natural laws. And one of those natural laws is that everything is mental. Like the whole universe is a mental construct. And so when it's almost as if his view was that, and I actually share this view, everything started because consciousness just happened to be, and it was bored, and it thought, suppose there was stuff. Well, if there were stuff, there would have to be rules governing it. What would those rules be? And it imagined those rules into existence, and that's what all of this is now. It's the imagination of the only thing that actually really is, which is consciousness. And it just imagined all of this stuff into existence with all these rules that are internally consistent. They make physics work. It all works together. Because that consciousness has a perfect understanding because it created it on its own. And we're all experiencing it as individuals because it's more fun that way.
To me, that would seem like looking through a telescope and seeing other universes and saying, well, because we can only see other universes through a telescope, they must be made of telescopes or something. It seems like it's an epistemic thing. If we're using this tool to experience other stuff, therefore everything is made of this tool.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But don't you think that's probably not a good argument in the case of the telescope, right?
Probably not a good argument in the case of the telescope.
So like I look through a telescope to see other galaxies and then therefore conclude the other galaxies are made of the telescope or they're in the telescope.
That's pretty silly, but you're looking through the telescope.
Right. I'm not seeing the difference in that case, though. It seems because it's the same epistemic grounds that if you have some medium and you use it to experience something, is it rational to conclude the thing you're experiencing is a product of the medium? And I think that in any case, the answer can be yes. Like if you have a spot on the end of your telescope or something, then that's a product of the telescope. But you can also have good reasons to think, no, that there's a galaxies out there because we look and we see it independently. Can verify it when we're not looking. There's all kinds of things. Computers can verify it.
Do you understand solipsism?
Yes.
So describe it.
The position that only your mind exists and everything else is a figment of your imagination.
There you go. That's basically how do you get out of that?
Well, I'd say novel testable predictions. I'd say my mind is very bad at predicting the future. But if I have some model, like there's an external world, if there's an external world, there's going to be an asteroid that goes around the solar system and comes next to us every 500 years, and we wait 500 years and we see the asteroid. All of those assumptions in the hypothesis, there is an external world, there's an asteroid, it's moving in whatever laws of physics, are justified to believe are something that's true about the world because the model was able to accurately predict the future experiences we had, whereas our mind is very bad at predicting future experiences.
Didn't you just describe the process through which your mind actually does predict stuff?
No, because like my mind predicts stuff in lots of ways, and most of them are wrong.
Okay. And
So I can
that's how
come up.
you get out. That's how you get out of solipsism.
Yes.
So, okay, my understanding of solipsism is that your mind is the only one, the only mind. It doesn't mean it's the only thing. It means it's the only mind. And you get out of that possibility by seeing that your mind doesn't make predictions very well. Well, that doesn't have, there's no argument there that there are other minds that can make predictions better.
Yeah,
Maybe that would be the argument. Other minds make predictions better than yours. So there must be other minds.
no, I would say that my argument is more for just belief in the external world, not other minds. If I specifically wanted to indicate other
Okay.
minds, I would make an argument like, my mind has specific properties that have patterns to them, so I can draw potato in the sand or whatever. And if I see other people drawing potato in the sand, it's rational to inductively conclude they have minds too, because they're doing the same thing my mind is doing, as far as I can tell.
Okay. So you can get out of solipsism by induction.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't remember why I asked.
See, I was asking about the telescope thing. We look through a telescope and see other galaxies. Is it rational to conclude the other galaxies are inside the telescope or something, or made from the telescope? And I'd say no. And I think the same thing would apply to consciousness. The fact that everything we experience is something we experience, that doesn't seem to justify belief that they're all a product of experience, just like the galaxy isn't a product of the telescope.
Okay. A product of your own experience.
Yeah.
What do you dream? Everything in a dream is a product of your own experience.
Yeah.
Have you done lucid dreaming?
Yes.
So in that frame of reference, the galaxies you see in your dream are made of the telescope or
Right.
the mind that's having the dream.
Yep.
So yeah, it's kind of like, all of this reality is just a dream? You run into the same epistemological problems trying to prove that when you're awake, you're not dreaming.
Well, I'd say that's because we can make novel predictions about what happens when I zap my brain in specific areas, what colors I'll see, what I'll feel. We can pretty conclusively determine which of those experiences are a result of the brain and which aren't. And so we can differentiate the ones that are just a product of my experience and which ones are not. And we have very successful models of doing that.
Starting from the brain is the primary thing
For dreams.
for dreams or for whatever experience you have, because we mess with the brain and your experience changes.
Right. But our experiences are wrong sometimes. There's something else there independent of our experiences, that if we stop having the experience, like if we stop seeing the moon, it's still there. And so the there-ness of the moon seems to be instantiated in something other than consciousness.
Sure. Yeah. I agree. It seems that way. And it probably is that way. But how do you... I'm comfortable entertaining both possibilities. I don't So the question of, what is it, primacy of matter or primacy of
Mind.
consciousness?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an old question, and it's a question that I like, and we're just landing on different sides of it. That doesn't bother me. There's no drive in me to resolve that question, because I resolved it for me, which is good enough for me. And if I meet other people and they resolved it the same way, then we're on the same page for a lot of stuff. But I end up being on the same page for a lot of stuff with other people, even if they don't have that view. So
Well, for me, it seems hard to believe why other people are on that side. Because to me, it's like someone who sees a pineapple and says, pineapples are the fundamental nature of the universe. And I'm very confused by this because I see pineapples come from trees, and trees are not the fundamental nature of the universe. And so, how could a pineapple be the fundamental nature of the universe when it's something that clearly all evidence says they come from trees? Maybe we're just wrong about the trees. It's just an illusion or something. But all of the evidence we have say they come from trees, and that's pretty good evidence as far as I can tell. And so, why would it be rational to say that pineapples are the fundamental nature of the universe when all of the pineapples we've seen have ever always come from trees?
well, that wouldn't be rational.
Would that be different than consciousness comes from brains?
Well, is your experience is the only thing that you've ever had, right?
Yeah.
So is your experience a pineapple? It's not
No.
my experience. It's not something that comes from trees. It's everything that you've ever had, and it's all that you've ever had. And so from that perspective, you could almost say it seems almost just as ridiculous to think there's actually stuff out there that isn't you, that happens and it's without you and you're not involved. And if you ever come to the evidence that says, oh yeah, that stuff is out there doing stuff, well, then it's part of your experience.
If I was always right, I would probably believe that. So if my thoughts, my
Yeah,
ideas were
yeah,
100% correct, always represented reality, I always knew the future, then yeah, I'd
yeah,
probably believe I was the fundamental nature of reality. But
right.
I'm wrong far more often than I'm right. And so there seems to be some discongruity between my mental states and the reality I'm experiencing. And so it seems like there must be some factor interfering with the rightness of my ideas that is independent of my consciousness itself, that shows there must be this third variable there, and it has to be more fundamental than my consciousness, or otherwise how could it make my consciousness wrong?
I agree with that. Um, what is what happens when you discover that you're wrong?
What happens? um I change my beliefs or something.
You correct yourself. But then the mystery is, how did you get wrong in the first place?
Yep.
Because you collect evidence and you think about it and you come to a conclusion and then you discover, oh, that conclusion's wrong. But how did I get there? Because you collected a bunch of evidence, and if all is mind, what's the problem with everything being mind in that situation is that your experience of it doesn't line up. So maybe everything isn't your mind, but if everything is mind, you have access to a little piece of it, which is the little piece of it granted to the bubble universe centered on what? Whatever part of the structure you think of as yourself. So you're in the middle of a big sphere, which is your universe, and I'm in the middle of a big sphere, which is really close to yours, relatively speaking, but it's a different big sphere. It's um, just an interesting thing to think about.
But why would
Materialism. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, why would we think there's another bigger sphere, bigger than my sphere and your sphere, that encompasses all spheres, rather than think it's conscious as opposed to thinking it's non-conscious?
Oh, I like that question. Why? Well, I do it because it makes life better for me. It's a perspective that, like this cat, it's a perspective that makes me feel, I guess, less isolated, less lonely, more connected, more in tune with what's going on with everybody else who's not me, because I don't have the experience that other people are having. If I'm in the same room with somebody, I'm having a conversation with them, our experience is pretty much the same. And I kind of think of that as a merging of our consciousness. It's like there's one conscious being there, and it's thinking, because I say stuff and they say stuff, and it's got two processors, one inside my skull and one inside their skull. But the conversation and the amount of attention we pay to each other can make the experience be like an experience of one being, but that one being is composed of two people. What is the your question kind of comes down to what is the value of that view? And that's like cooperation and working together. And if you notice that making other people happy makes you feel good, then that's just a weird mystery and something that you can enjoy. But if you take on the hypothesis that there's a thing that's having the experience and you're part of it and they're part of it, then I don't know, it feels more right to me to look at it that way.
Why does having the third party consciousness make it feel better? I don't, from my
I don't
perspective,
know.
if I see like two
I
people
don't know.
having an
Yeah,
interaction.
I don't know why.
Because to me, it actually seems the other way. It seems like if there's this other person spying on you in a relationship with someone, it seems weird in a way. I had a conversation with a professor recently about would the universe be better if there was a God or something, and he said one of the reasons people say no is because having a perpetual person spying on you 24/7 is very uncomfortable. And the same thing would seem to apply here. Like if there's this consciousness watching your every move, it's not interacting with you in any way or directly in the conversation, or you're having a conversation with another person, and there's this other third person just watching. I mean, it's great YouTube for YouTube content, but I'm not sure if it would be making the situation better.
Where did you get the other person? The third
Also,
person?
like, if me and you are having a conversation, we're our own two bubble things, bubble universes, and then the question is that better or worse if we add in a third bubble, a bigger bubble that encapsulates all the other bubbles? And it's
Well,
just,
okay, but how does that relate to what we were talking about? Was okay, I can see a little bit of a connection. If you think of two bubbles and then there's a third bubble, that's different from if you think of two bubbles that just merged to one big bubble. Is that what you did? Because in my head, it's when I'm in a deep enough conversation with one other person, or actually, it doesn't matter how many other people, everybody's there paying attention to the conversation. We're all on the same wavelength. We're all part of that one big bubble. There's no, like nth party. There's no extra. It's just all of us together. You could think of all of us together as an extra one, but that's not an extra one that's part of the group. That's the extra one that is the whole group. It's not outside of the group. It is the group itself. It's almost like um, the experiments where they cut the corpus callosum of people who have epilepsy or whatever, and those people then find themselves getting dressed with their right hand and getting undressed with their left hand. So it's really acting like two people, but there's one person who realizes, oh, I'm acting like two people, and has to figure out how to correct it. And I don't remember if those stories are from the observation of the doctor or of the staff who noticed this happening, or if the person's own experience, they just sort of realized, oh, this weird thing is happening where I'm trying to get undressed to, go to bed at night, and half of me is doing the opposite because I'm not connected anymore, and I realize I'm not connected anymore or whatever. But that's an example of the two beings merging into one.
Yeah, I'm familiar with those cases. V.S. Ramachandran talks about them quite a lot, where there's like multiple consciousnesses in one brain.
Yeah.
But I don't see how. So you're saying that would not be, if there isn't a consciousness isn't fundamental and there's just materialism, then there's not this joining of consciousnesses when you chat or something.
What?
Well, I'm trying to understand more about what, because you said it makes you feel better to think of interactions as if they're two consciousness bubbles that are like joining into one consciousness bubble.
Yeah.
And if materialism is true and there is no extra consciousness bubbles, are you saying that's just doesn't feel as good or is less real, or some case the conversation isn't as meaningful in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Like what ways? I don't see like inherent value in the idea of the consciousness bubbles merging, so I don't understand what value that adds to something or not something.
And you would like to?
Yeah, to understand your argument.
Okay. You know what the term meeting of the minds is?
Heard it before.
So, like, if you make a contract, there's supposed to be a meeting of the minds, which means all of the parties to the contract have the same understanding. And if you're aware of there being the potential for two people in conversation to actually be having one experience, or recognize that perspective, the contract itself can represent what that is, and then both of you probably have a little more faith in the contract. And there's always room for misunderstanding, and so you have to be really careful there. But comfort and security of, for example, being a member in a herd gives you security, which partially comes from the fact that something that's going to attack one of you has a very low chance of attacking you because you're just one of many. But there's another function of the herd, which is the signaling that happens in a herd. If something happens somewhere in the herd, one of the members of the herd recognizes it and quickly transmits that information to the rest of the herd. So everybody in the herd feels a little bit more secure. Then maybe that's part of the attraction that I feel for all is mental. Mentalism, that's what natural law calls it, at least in English. The law of mentalism.
So like the zebra herd thing?
Sure.
Is there any other justification for the position other than that it makes you feel more comfortable?
Did we talk about the chick robot intention study last time?
I don't
Maybe.
think so. I don't remember,
Okay.
but I don't think
There's
so.
a guy who did an experiment. I think the title of the paper he wrote is Psychokinetic Action of Chicks on a Robot. He took like a coffee can and turned it into a robot, had two wheels and a pivot point, and then it would take instructions so that it could either spin around in a circle one way or the other way, or go forward straight or go backward straight. So it really only had 4 motions, and it would take its motion instructions from from any source, and he hooked it up to a physical random number generator source. So its motion was random, and then you put it in a cage next to these baby chicks who had imprinted on it because they thought it. So the baby chicks thought it was their mother. They wanted it to be close to them, and it's taking random motion instructions. Without the baby chicks there, it does move about randomly. So it's about 50% on one side of the cage and 50% on the other. But when the baby chicks are there, it's 72% of the time it's on the side of the cage with the baby chicks. So they thought maybe that had something to do with imprinting and chemistry and whatever. So they changed the dynamics and did the same experiment with a second batch of chicks. But instead of them imprinting on the robot, they just put a candle on top of the robot and shut all the lights off. And the same result happened. So the question then is, why is the robot going toward the baby chicks? And the only difference we know of is there were baby chicks there that wanted that to happen. So it seems like the presence of the baby chicks caused something not inside of their brains to manifest because they wanted it to.
I just call it a statistical
Yeah, so
chance.
you do it over and over and over again, and you keep getting 72%, and then you have to throw out the possibility that it's just chance.
Right. So I would say it's probably just chance. Most likely, it probably wouldn't be repeatable in that way unless there was something like either the chick could follow it around, and so it's on the same size as the box because the chick is literally just following it around. That would make sense.
Yep.
Or there's a weighted difference to the box, and so if there's like a slight bend because of the weight of the chick, then that would introduce a new variable into the movement of the robot, so it's not perfectly random.
Yeah. The baby chicks were in a cage. The robot was in a 10 by 10 foot cage, and the baby chicks were in a smaller cage outside of the 10 by 10 foot cage. But anyway, another piece of evidence, which is just hearsay, is a lady that Tim Ferriss interviewed on his podcast because she was working at a human animal communication research center. And one of the protocols of having a job there is that anything that happens in your mind that doesn't seem to be part of what you're trying to do, you need to write it down. So she was in a room with a dog, and she got an image of a upper arm of a man with a tattoo of a bald eagle on it and a blue sky in the background. And then she remembered that she's supposed to follow this protocol because it's part of her job. So she wrote it down in the notes. And then a couple hours later, she was walking around and she heard some crying from the lobby. And so she went to investigate and found a lady there who had read her report and was crying about it because she explained her son, who had owned the dog, died in a car accident 2 weeks earlier, and he had the tattoo and all that. So in that story, the theory is that the image came from the dog and entered her mind, and that's why she got it, because the dog missed his master. And there's other little stories like that. There's also something I learned in the Landmark Forum. I took the Landmark Forum, and they suggested that sometimes if you're listening actively to somebody and you have a thought which might solve a problem that they're expressing, you don't always have to say it. If you're listening well enough, they might come up with it on their own. which you could say, well, that's because it's in your head and it gets in theirs, which goes back to the single bubble. Or you could say it's just random, which I think you would want to, because you have apparently put some stock into materialism. I'm okay with either one. I like the mentalism better. So it's the side I land on.
I wouldn't say it was random. I'd say that if two people are talking about one subject and they're trying to solve a problem, both of their brains are trying to solve the problem, and they're probably pretty similar in their epistemic basis, and so they're probably going to come up with similar solutions. Like that's the Abraham Lincoln quote: "Books exist to show man's ideas are not so original," something like that.
Okay.
I mean, what would you think about that one? That you can probably find parallels of someone writing a book or writing a story and then looking back in the past and say, someone came up with that before, like Elon Musk's Hyperloop. That one's an interesting one, where we find people in the 1920s also had this idea. Now, I don't think that the mind bubble of the people in the 1920s and the mind bubble of Elon Musk were like joined together across time. I think it's just that there's common patterns in the way that the brain works, such that the way we combine ideas is a similar pattern across timescales, because just how our brain works. And therefore, the fact that Elon Musk came up with a similar idea as the people in the 1920s is more likely explained by the functioning of our brains rather than the joining of the mind bubbles.
Sure.
Do you think that would count against the evidence of the cases like the one that you mentioned, where because of how our brains work, we come up with a bunch of different ideas and they can be mirrored and just happen to align in those cases, just like they happen to align across time scales?
It's you could do either one. You could use the evidence for or against it, because I mean, you're bringing in it just so happened, right? So there's lots of things that just happened. It just so happened that this thing, whatever. There's all kinds of examples like that, and we don't have enough examples, or we can't collect the data to do the statistical analysis and say, oh, the chances of this thing that actually did happen are 1 in a million. Well, okay, but has there been a million possibility? Has there been a million situations where it could have happened? Because then, yeah, we would have expected it to happen once. We don't know. And it's really, I think it's up to each person to choose materialism or choose spirit. Maybe those are, is that good? Two good categories for it: materialism and spiritualism.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've been thinking about claims that are not falsifiable, and you rightly point out that from my position, all claims that are not falsifiable can be believed. But then I was thinking, well, you can make two claims which are contradictory and both not falsifiable. And then it's like, well, you get to choose which one to believe, because you can't prove that either one of them is wrong. You could also choose to disbelieve both of them. Being okay with all of that is easy for me. I think there's a lot of people that's really disturbing, but it is the case. So
why do you think that the vast majority of experts in brain fields, neurology, psychology, cognitive science, neuroscience, philosophy of mind, are leaning towards the materialism side?
materialism makes positivism easier. I think it's called positivism. So there's a view of science which says, well, we think this is true, and so we're going to do this experiment to prove it. And then they do the experiment works, and then they say, oh yeah, see, it's true. That's really popular, and people really like that. And this basis in material makes that easier. The problem with it for me is that it's doing science backwards, because science is not a method that we use to find truth. It's a method that we use to identify incorrect stories about how the universe works. And we do that by, the story is a hypothesis, and we come up with an experiment to test the falsifiability of the hypothesis. And if we keep doing that over and over and over again, and we can't falsify the hypothesis, then it becomes scientific theory. It's still theory, and it can never stop being theory. Science gives us theory, it doesn't give us fact. The facts that we can find are stories that are wrong. And we've done that over and over again, so we've rejected lots of stories.
So would that mean that if we could get like some kind of absolute certainty about something, found some method that gives us absolute certainty, would that disprove the mind hypothesis?
Yeah, I think so.
Why?
Well, okay, maybe it wouldn't. I don't know.
Well, I'm asking because I'm lost on the relevance of why science being provisional means that that's better explained under materialism or something, or
No, it doesn't. You asked why all of the people doing science
right.
tend to be materialists. And the answer is because they like proving things true. They don't like coming up with stories and then coming up with experiments that can show the stories are wrong, which is what science really is. They like using science to prove that things are true, and using materialism and sticking with materialism gives them that, because the induction feels more like deduction. If you stick with materialism, you reject all of the claims that are not falsifiable. There's no spirit, there's no experience. You can't build a machine that has experience. Maybe that's a good fundamental claim to play with. I think that you can build a machine that has experience. We wouldn't know it unless we came up with something, I don't know, some novel test that would demonstrate the experience of a thing.
Well, I think we're definitely going to build AIs that have conscious experience, and then they're going to be able to merge their conscious experience with ours, and that's how we'd be able to prove it. Essentially, we're going to have joint conscious experiences where you can just plug it into one robot and plug it into a different robot, and we can just have their experience. But I still think that would be consistent with materialism. I think it would be more likely under materialism, because if consciousness was some fundamental force thing, it would probably be harder to mess with, harder to join them deliberately than if it was a brain state thing. If it's a brain state thing, a higher order emergent property, it seems to me like it would be easier to merge them, to combine them, to mess with them, than if it was a fundamental state thing.
Well, maybe we'll find out someday. We don't know yet.
Cool. Well, we have a few questions from the audience, if you don't mind. Tim asks, is there such a thing as too conscious, like being too much conscious?
Huh. Not for me. I mean, at least I have never been more conscious than I wanted to be.
I've experienced that quite often.
Oh, you have? Okay, interesting. So there you go.
Zao Levis asks, anything that has a limit is dependent on something else to define its limit, random or determined. What determine the limits and specifications of the fundamental natural laws?
Wow, who knows?
I think that's really similar to my question about if mind is fundamental, why am I wrong so much? It's like, because there has to be something independent of my mind setting those limits or those facts that I'm not correct about.
Yeah, somebody was talking about simulations on Telegram a couple days ago, and I came up with sometimes the simulation is persistent and consistent enough that you can stop worrying about whether or not it's a simulation. Just pretend it's reality. That came to mind when you said it, but I don't know why.
Gotcha. I think that was it for the questions, unless anybody else in the chat has one. I don't really have any other questions. Do you have anything thoughts, questions? All right. Oh, we've been going for about an hour. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. Do you want to give any links or references where people can find more about your work?
Voluntarist.com. I think you said you're on board with voluntarism.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, good. So cool. I think everybody should be. Make the world a better place.
For sure.
All right.
Yep. Thanks again for coming on, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right. You too.